It's time to tell the story of James Reeb, the Unitarian minister who came to Selma from Boston at the behest of Martin Luther King Jr., his call for all clergy who were sympathetic to the civil rights movement, who was murdered by white supremacists. Now, I can't tell this story better than the sources that I'm getting this information from. One is the NPR podcast White Lies. Highly recommend, cannot recommend enough. Please support them. Please listen to all of it. You'll hear a lot about Selma itself. You'll hear a lot about the local organizers like Reverend Bevel and Bernard Lafayette and some of these other, Amelia Boynton, some of the other people who led the voting rights movement in Selma that leads to these marches. You'll hear a lot about the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson as well, a young black man, a deacon in his own church, a father who was 26, who was protecting his kids and his mother from white state troopers, who also was murdered, who galvanized Selma to march, the first march, which turns into Bloody Sunday. I'm also getting information from crmvets.org. Civil Rights Movements Veterans.org. This is a website run by people who were there. Support them as well. James Reeb is born January 1st, 1927. He serves in World War II. He comes back and he gets his degree from St. Olaf's. He becomes a Presbyterian minister, but by 1957 he decides that he no longer wants to be with the Presbyterian Church. So he goes to the Unitarian Church and says, this place aligns better with me. And he takes his wife and his 4 children to Boston. Now, March 7th happens. The photos come out of Amelia Boynton being beaten and passing out from tear gas. The photos come out of John Lewis with a state trooper standing over him, beating him with a club. And it shows 600 peaceful protesters just trying to get the right to vote. And also quietly, peacefully marching to take a stand against Jimmy Lee Jackson's murder that just happened days before. It was like February 26th. That night, Martin Luther King gets on the radio and he asks for clergy members across the country to join him for a march on Tuesday in Selma. And James Reeb says to his wife, I gotta go. And she says later in interviews that she was sad and disappointed, but she knew that the man that she married wouldn't not go. She tried to dissuade him a little bit with you have 4 kids, right? March 19th, 1965, turnaround Tuesday march goes off pretty well. I mean, as well as it could, right? They were in George Wallace's segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, Alabama, demanding voting rights, which are given to them in the Constitution, just not enforced by the state or federal authorities in Alabama, right? March 9th, he goes to dinner with 2 other Unitarian ministers, and they call their wives from the diner they're in, they leave, and he and his other 2 Unitarian ministers that he is with are attacked by a group of white men. Eyewitness testimony says 3 to 4, sometimes even 5. He gets hit on the back of the head with a club or a pipe or something very, very bad. Now he gets taken to a clinic, right? Because he is a white man in Selma, Alabama that is supporting Black Americans' right to vote. And they couldn't be treated at a regular hospital. This clinic immediately says, you got to get to Birmingham. He needs a neurosurgeon. Now, the NPR podcast White Lies really dives into the stories that come up around this trip from the clinic to the hospital, because a pervasive story throughout Alabama for generations to come is that the civil rights leaders, the 2 Unitarian ministers who rode in the ambulance with him, killed him because they needed a white martyr. That is something that comes up a lot in Selma specifically, and throughout this, that's a through line through the NPR podcast that I listened to. But what really happened is he got to the Birmingham hospital and he was in and out for a few days, and then he eventually succumbed to his injuries March 11th, 1965. He was 38 years old. He was a father of 4. He was a Unitarian minister who firmly believed that the civil rights movement was a movement worth dying for. Shortly thereafter, Lyndon Baines Johnson will pass the civil rights. He'll sign into law the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. And this is a moment in time, one of these moments, one of these murders that galvanizes the country, not just nationally, but also internationally. People are like, what the fuck is going on? And there is a conversation around, why the country didn't get more angry about Jimmy Lee Jackson's murder, which is just February 26th. It's less than a month before, and he's a 26-year-old deacon in his church, and he was protecting his mother and his daughter and his grandfather during a voting rights march, and he gets shot by a state trooper. And of course, we know part of this is that the United States is very racist. But it's important to also understand that while his murder was senseless and it was ridiculous, and the man that murders him, the first line of his fucking Wikipedia page is a former state trooper and drug trafficker. He was not a good guy. He got to walk free until 2005. I forget his name, I'm sorry. The men that murdered James Reeb are tried at the end of 1965, right? The one that actually swung the club, his name is Elmer Cook. There are two others that are tried, William Hoggle and Naaman Hoggle. Now, the first trial is going to end in a hung jury, which surprised everybody, right? And the attorney general decides to take it to a second trial, which ends up acquitting these men for the murder. Now, from the NPR podcast, they find out there's a fourth man. But I'll let you listen to the whole thing to get that story. I am obviously learning more about that, and I am still reading this book, Confederates in the Attic, about the South and about the aftermath of the Civil War, and the fact that we never reckoned with these stories and we don't tell the truth about them. We gloss over them. We say, a couple of civil rights workers got murdered in Mississippi. There was a murder that spurred the Selma to Montgomery March. There was a murder that spurred the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. But there were so many fucking murders. And we're not honest about it. And we can't move past it if we're not fucking honest about it. In 2065, I will be 75 years old. We will be 200 years out of the Civil War. We will be 100 years out of Jim Crow ending. We have to be honest about our fucking history in this country, or we will never move forward.